There's a story from a Soviet psychiatric hospital in the 1970s. Doctors had a test they used on political prisoners: total sensory deprivation, isolation, sleep manipulation, designed specifically to break a person's mind without ever touching their body. Most prisoners cracked within days, but a small handful didn't. And when researchers studied why, they found something strange. It wasn't the strongest, the smartest, or the most physically resilient prisoners who survived intact. It was the ones who had already, long before captivity, built a very specific kind of internal architecture, one that didn't depend on anything the outside world could take away. Friedrich Nietzsche never heard of that experiment. He died decades before it happened. But in his own life, in his own words, he had already described exactly what that architecture looks like, because he was forced to build it himself, alone in constant pain, with almost no one who understood what he was doing until long after he was gone. If this is your first time here, before we go further, hit subscribe, tap that bell icon, and drop a like, because this channel is building a full series unpacking Nietzsche's ideas, and this might be the most practically useful one yet. Here's the question this video is actually built around. What if the mind that can't be broken isn't the one that avoids every hard thing, but the one that was deliberately built, piece by piece, out of the exact pressures most people spend their lives trying to escape? Let's start with the foundation of Nietzsche's entire argument, because it contradicts almost everything the modern world tells you about mental strength. Nietzsche did not believe an unbreakable mind is one that avoids damage. He believed the opposite, that a mind which has never been tested, never been pressured, never been forced to hold itself together under real strain, isn't strong. It's simply untested. And an untested mind, when real pressure finally does arrive, tends to shatter completely, precisely because nothing in its history ever taught it how to absorb impact. He compared this directly to physical training. A bone that's never been stressed stays brittle, but a bone that experiences small fractures under controlled load actually grows back denser, stronger, more resistant at exactly the point of the break. Nietzsche believed the mind works on the same principle. He wrote that what does not kill him makes him stronger. And while that line has been printed on so many gym walls that it's lost most of its meaning, the actual mechanism behind it is precise. Controlled damage, properly processed, doesn't weaken the structure. It reinforces it, exactly at the point where it was tested. This means the first requirement for building an unbreakable mind is one most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid. You cannot build it in permanent safety. You build it by deliberately exposing yourself to manageable amounts of difficulty repeatedly, rather than organizing your entire life around never being tested at all. But exposure to difficulty alone isn't enough. Plenty of people go through enormous hardship and come out more fragile, not less. So what determines which direction it goes? This brings us to the second principle, and it's the one Nietzsche considered absolutely central. He called it self-overcoming, the deliberate, conscious decision to extract something usable from every difficulty, rather than simply enduring it and hoping it passes. The difference isn't the hardship itself. It's what happens inside your mind afterward. A person who experiences failure and immediately starts asking what it taught them is building something. A person who experiences the exact same failure and spends the following months resenting it, replaying it, treating it purely as evidence of their own inadequacy, is not building anything. They're just accumulating damage without ever converting it into strength. Nietzsche believed this conversion process, turning raw experience into usable material, is a skill, not a personality trait, which means it can be deliberately trained, the same way you train any other capacity. Every time you consciously choose to ask, what does this make possible now, instead of why did this happen to me, you're reinforcing exactly the mental muscle that keeps a mind from shattering the next time real pressure arrives. The third principle is one Nietzsche returned to constantly, and it might be the single most important piece of this entire blueprint. He called it self-legislation, building your sense of stability from an internal standard, rather than renting it from other people's opinions. Here's why this matters so much. A mind that depends on external validation for its stability is, by definition, fragile, because it has handed control of its own foundation to people who can withdraw that validation at any moment, for any reason, often without even realizing the damage they're causing. Praise arrives, and the person feels solid. Criticism arrives, and the entire structure wobbles. This isn't strength. It's a foundation built on ground that isn't actually theirs. Nietzsche believed the unbreakable mind operates completely differently. It develops its own private, internal standard for what counts as a good decision, a disciplined day, an honest effort, and it holds itself to that standard regardless of whether anyone else notices, approves, or even knows. This is what allowed Nietzsche himself to keep writing for decades, while almost entirely unread, unrecognized, and frequently mocked by the few critics who did encounter his work. His stability wasn't rented from an audience that mostly didn't exist yet. It was owned, privately, by a standard he'd built for himself and refused to abandon regardless of the silence around him. The fourth principle is amor fati, the active, deliberate love of your own fate, including the parts that hurt the most. This isn't passive acceptance. It's closer to a refusal to remain at war with a past that cannot be changed. Nietzsche understood that resentment toward your own history keeps a wound permanently open, because it positions you as a victim of events rather than the author of what happens next. An unbreakable mind isn't one that never experienced anything devastating. It's one that eventually stopped fighting a battle against events that had already permanently finished and redirected all of that energy toward what comes after instead. The fifth principle is the willingness to tolerate solitude without needing it resolved immediately. Nietzsche believed most minds break not at the moment of the actual crisis, but afterward, in the isolation that follows it, when the initial support is faded, when other people have moved on, and the person is left alone with a difficulty no one else fully understands or is available to help carry. A mind that has never practiced sitting inside that kind of solitude, without panicking, without immediately needing rescue, tends to break precisely in that silence. A mind that has deliberately built tolerance for being alone with a hard thing, even briefly, even in small doses, long before any real crisis arrives, has already rehearsed the exact scenario that breaks most people and finds it survivable when it eventually shows up for real. Put these 5 principles together, and a clear picture emerges of what Nietzsche actually meant by an unbreakable mind. Not a mind that avoids damage. Not a mind that feels nothing. A mind that has been deliberately, repeatedly exposed to manageable pressure, that has trained itself to extract something usable from every difficulty rather than simply enduring it, that draws its stability from an internal standard rather than external approval, that has made active peace with its own past instead of remaining at war with it, and that has practiced tolerating solitude long before solitude was forced upon it by crisis. None of this happens quickly, and Nietzsche never suggested it does. A mind built this way is assembled slowly through years of small, repeated, often invisible decisions. The same way real physical strength is built, one rep at a time, long before anyone else can see the difference. Here's the uncomfortable part worth sitting with. Nietzsche's own final collapse in Turin doesn't disprove any of this. If anything, it confirms just how much sustained pressure it takes to break a mind that was genuinely built this way. Because by every account, Nietzsche held that mind together through decades of chronic pain, isolation, and rejection that would have broken most people far sooner. His collapse wasn't evidence that his philosophy failed. It was evidence of exactly how much weight an unbreakable mind can actually carry before it finally gives out. So here's the question worth asking yourself. Where in your life have you been organizing everything around staying untested, mistaking the absence of pressure for the presence of strength? And what would change if you started treating your hardest moments not as threats to survive and forget, but as the exact training your mind actually needs to become the kind of structure that can genuinely hold the next time real pressure arrives? If this video gave you something worth thinking about, make sure you're subscribed with the bell turned on, because the next one goes even deeper into exactly how Nietzsche believed we're meant to turn pressure into permanent strength. And you won't want to miss it.